from New York, Mr. Higgins, to inquire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There are 13 organ systems in the human body. There are 70,000 ways that those organ systems can fail. There's 4,000 medical procedures, and there's 6,000 FDA-approved prescription drugs. It's very complicated, but it's also very expensive. The American healthcare system last year was $3.5 trillion, 18% of the entire American economy. The federal government alone spent more than a third of that at $1.3 trillion, including $333 billion on prescription drugs. CAR T-cell therapy is a form of immunotherapy, and that cancer treatment costs $475,000 to $1.5 million per patient. So $175,000 to $1.5 million per patient. In the United States, in the past 15 years, 42.5% of the 10 million cancer cases had lost all of their life savings within a little bit more than 2 years. The Veterans Administration they serve 18 million people, 9 million of whom are enrolled in the VA healthcare system. According to a study that was conducted between 2012 and 2017, 5 years, if Medicare Part D paid for prescription drugs similar to what the Department of Veterans Affairs pays, there would be an annual savings of between 38 and 50%. It was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association, Internal Medicine. Dr. Miller, we hear from pharmaceutical companies all the time as to how if we tried to lower the cost of prescription drugs to all of our constituents, we're also, as a federal government, a huge purchaser of drugs. It's a lot of money, but it's a lot of leverage. And it seems to me that if Medicaid and the VA can achieve savings in the 38 to 50% range, you reduce that $333 billion on prescription drugs that collectively the federal government finances to about $166.5 billion. So obviously pharmaceutical companies would categorically reject this and make the argument that it somehow undermines their ability to do innovative research to bring new therapies to market. What would your response to that be, sir?
Well, this is some of what I walked through just a second ago. I think that there's still a lot of dollars here in the market. They will have a strong motivation to continue R&D. I think the prices under this legislation would still be attractive to them. And I think there are revenues in the industry itself that could be redeployed. Keep in mind that some of the savings that you're extracting in Medicaid and the VA, in Medicaid, there are legislated discounts, and in the VA, there is the negotiation about whether a drug goes on to the formulary. H.R. 3 proceeds differently, engages in negotiation, but intends to keep the drug on the formulary. So it's a little different than what will go on in VA.
But doctor, the larger point is this. If we have a $4.7 trillion annual budget, 1.3 of which federal government outlays for health care and $333 billion for prescription drugs. We have an obligation, people always invoke the private sector and the need to allow them to innovate and everything else. It's nonsense. The majority of basic research is done by the National Institutes of Health. And further, drug companies are moving away from the very expensive and less profitable basic research and into later stages of drug discovery where there are huge profits. So when we spend $1.3 trillion, including $333 billion on prescription drugs, that doesn't take into consideration what taxpayers spend through the National Institutes of Health in drug development. And I just think that we've got to, on behalf of the American taxpayer, use the enormous leverage that we have to drive down the cost of health care, to drive down the cost of prescription drugs, and demand a better outcome in terms of the product that we're paying for. I yield back.